Hi, everyone. Welcome to a new live taping of the Support is Sexy podcast. I'm so happy to have you here, and I'm so happy to welcome our guest, Shatanese Reese. I'm going to tell you all about her. We're going to talk about how to get your mind right, emotional intelligence, what that really means, and how you can use it personally and professionally, of course. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Shatanese first and what we're going to talk about. Then we're going to welcome her. We're going to dive in. And as always, if you have any questions, if you're watching live, go ahead and post them in the chat. I'll make sure that we ask Shatanese all of your questions, most of your questions, all the great questions. All of them will be great, but you know what I mean. We'll ask the questions and then we'll jump in. So as a certified, I want to call you a personal coach, as a certified emotional intelligence coach, Shatanese Reese strives to help others reach their greatest potential. Through engaging workshops and thought-provoking one-on-one coaching, she facilitates discovery and understanding. Her passions are at the intersection, I'm too excited, Shatanese. Her passions are at the intersection of emotional intelligence and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Her clients and workshop participants leave feeling motivated, focused, and empowered, and learning about emotional intelligence, which is what we are going to talk about today, why it really matters. Now, most of us have probably heard about emotional intelligence. Shatanese is going to help us dive deep into it. So with all of that and all of my fumbling, because I'm way too excited, welcome. Thank you for being here, Shatanese.
Hello. I'm not going to dance. I promised you I wouldn't dance. So hello.
Dancing is fine. We like dancing. We like for people to see dancing. So tell us, to start us off, what is your definition, I should say, of emotional intelligence?
And let me first say thank you so much for having me this evening, Elaine. I'm excited. I love the concept of, support is sexy. So kudos to you. I know you're changing lives on a regular basis, so keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
In terms of a definition of emotional intelligence, the short and skinny is how we show up. How we show up and interact with others, and how we interpret and our perception of ourselves as well as other individuals. So that's the short and skinny definition that I like to live by. Just exactly that. How do we show up on a daily basis with people at work, our personal relationships? How do we show up? So if you had to quote it, that's what
it is, how we show up. And it's funny that you say about how we show up, because I think most of us probably, or certainly I'll speak for myself, I don't want to bring everybody into it, but I usually think emotional intelligence is about how we interpret everything around us, or how we interpret other people and how they're behaving and what they might be feeling and all those things. But it sounds like, I know even in some of the early discussions we've had, it's as much about knowing about ourselves as it is about the external. Would that be right?
Yes, that is absolutely right. And I want to talk just a little bit about what exactly are the subscales and the scales. So I personally like the EQI 2.0. That's the measurement. That's the tool that I use in terms of assessments. So if you ever were working with me, I'd send you the link. You'd go through a series of questions, and then we'd have an actual printout. And I have one here to actually
show. What is it called? The EQI?
EQI 2.0. And I love it because it really breaks down, the various areas. And so as your coach, I would go through each of the areas and say, okay, let's see what your strengths are, and let's see what your areas of opportunity are. But there are 5 areas, Elaine, and I wanted to kind of break those down. So the first one is self-perception. How do we actually perceive ourselves? When we look at ourselves in the mirror, what is it that immediately goes through our mind? How do we think that we are aware in terms of our emotional self-awareness? The second is self-expression. How do we express ourselves? Are we one of those individuals that are like, oh my gosh, in your face, so excited, exuberant, or are we more reserved? Are we, quiet? People can pick up on, what we're thinking and what we're feeling. The third is interpersonal, one of my favorites, because it talks about our interpersonal relationships and how empathetic are we? Can we put ourselves in individual shoes, or are we so self-consumed that we don't know, can't read cues, we're not sure, why people are feeling what we're feeling, and so empathy is a part of the interpersonal scale. Then stress management. 2020 was a great example for many of us in terms of, how do we deal with stress? This particular area talks about, are you flexible? I love the concept of being, oh my goodness, it's the flexible, blessed are the flexible because they will not be bent out of shape.
So say it again, the flexible.
Blessed are the flexible because they will not be bent out of shape.
Oh, I like that one. Blessed are the flexible because they will not be bent out of shape.
Yes.
And if 2020 taught us anything, it's that we must learn to be flexible.
Absolutely. Or were you not? Were you kind of stuck? Was it difficult for you to pivot? How are you just in terms of dealing with, stress? Were you optimistic about what was happening in 2020? That would have been a clear indicator to say, maybe this is an area on which I need to work. Then the last one is decision making. How do you make decisions? Are you like me, in some regard, a bull in a china shop where you're, just running around making decisions? Or are you the type of person where you need it to be, linear? You're making very calculated, strategic, decisions. And something that I want to point out is that there's not necessarily a bad or, good. It's where do you use these muscles? How are you using these muscles? What's your go-to? So when you're stressed, are you in one area versus another? When you are faced with a problem, how do you, look at what's happening and try to make some decisions about how to proceed? And so all of those areas, so there's the 5 areas and then the 15 subscales, that makes up the EQI 2.0. And I love it because it really gives us just a behind the scenes look at who we are as individuals. And no assessment, no report, no 2 reports are the same. And so I've also people talk about, I know and I'll be quiet in just a second, but I've had people ask about, well, what about the DISC? So, and the DISC is it's another tool that people use, in terms of assessment and personality. So the DISC can show you.
Is it DISC? How do you?
DISC. DISC.
DISC. Okay.
So it's a dominant, influential, steady, and conscientious. So that's a totally different tool. I like to use them together. So the DISC will show you, kind of where you're strong, but the EQI 2.0 will actually tell you, where you can actually improve and make those areas even stronger. So,
okay. I have so many questions. I know so many questions. I'm trying to keep, I moved my notebook to have space over here and I'm like, dog it, I know I should have left that over there. So a couple of questions. One you did answer already. And everyone, if you're just joining, we're talking about emotional intelligence, what it means and why it matters. That's what I'm summing this up as, what it means and why it matters, with Shatanese Reese, who is an emotional intelligence expert, certified coach and emotional intelligence expert. So one question or one thing you answered for me was whether on the scale there's a quote unquote good or bad. Like if you're the person that, isn't so flexible, or say last year was difficult, it was difficult for all of us for different reasons, but some people may have had a really tough time, even if it wasn't flexibility. Something I learned from one of my clients who's actually a psychologist, Robin Stone, she said the uncertainty was part of the trauma. And when she told me that, that really made sense to me. Like, oh, right. It's just, yes, it was like mind blowing. Like, right. It's the uncertainty or the feeling of, even if you're not a controlling person, we all essentially realized how much control we did not have. Outside basically closed and we had no control, right? So that was the thing that I'm glad you answered that, Justice. There's no right or wrong or good or bad as far as the scale. It sounds like it's more understanding yourself. But I did want to ask, so once you go through, when you go through the process of asking someone the questions, what is the next step? Once I know where I am on the scale, is it making adjustments in order to tweak certain areas? Or is it just understanding where I am and how to adjust things? And then another question is, if I am a person who isn't flexible, we can ask this after. If I am a person who determines that maybe I'm not as flexible as I could be, or maybe I just want to be more flexible, because I've learned that with my business, I had a certain kind of business, things change, now I have to adapt. Does your work also help people learn how to do that too? And then Tara, I see you have a question here, so we're going to ask that next.
Yeah, so yes, once an individual completes the assessment, we get a report, as I mentioned before, and then we walk through the report. We take a deep dive, and so I call those my assessment debriefs, and it's an hour long one-on-one debrief where we go through each of the areas. And then, I really, in terms of coaching as a whole, the individual is in the driver's seat. So there's not a
Mhm.
it's a misnomer in terms of, okay, I'm going to get a coach and they're going to tell me what to do. No,
Exactly.
we're going to focus on areas of interest. But what I will do, Elaine, when I'm working with my clients, I'll ask, okay, so this is where you are now in terms of your career professionally. Where are you trying to go? And let's see where you line up in certain areas. So, for example, if you're wanting to be seen as a leader, as a successful manager, you need to be able to have empathy, right? You need to be able to be flexible. You need to be able to be strong in the problem solving subscale. So we'll look at those areas. And I also wanted to mention that, yes, there's not a good or a bad, but there is a median. So 100 is the score that is tried and tested. So this particular tool has been tested by 4,000 individuals in the United States and Canada. And so 100 is the median score. So
The median score. Okay.
individuals can score above 100 on various subscales, or they can score lower than 100. So while we keep that median score in mind, I also want individuals to look at themselves. How are they scoring for themselves? So, for example, let's say someone scores at 100 in all of the areas above 100. While that's awesome, there are areas that are lower, right, than the other areas. So we will focus on those
I
and
know.
come up with a plan of action.
I was
So
going to say, I like that you call those opportunities, right, as opposed to strengths versus weaknesses, strengths versus opportunities.
So we'll come up with a plan of action. So if you're wanting to be more flexible, you want to operate in that subscale better, then we will look at a strategy plan. And then I offer coaching for beyond the debrief, and that could be 1 to 2 more sessions, 3 to 4 more sessions. It's really an excellent tool for individuals who are at the executive level, and you could ask yourself, what's the feedback that I'm getting from individuals? This tool also offers a 360, so you're looking at yourself from all different angles, which
Right.
can be scary. But when you're working with a coach, you can see, all right, so this is where I see myself, right? But this is where my peers see me, or this is where the person to whom I report sees me. So why is there a gap? What's happening
Right.
here? Let's talk
It's
about
so interesting because I just did a conversation with mentors yesterday from SCORE, who are from a corporate background, and I come from corporate, but many years ago in publishing, which is still a little bit different than the bank and that kind of thing. But one of the women, Bridget, was giving me feedback on my website. And, I'm a content person, so I'm thinking everything's explained well. And I wish she didn't say that it wasn't. But she's like, oh, when I look at this is what I see, or I don't know what you do here. And I was like, that is so interesting. It's one of those things but because one of those things excuse me, that everyone interprets things differently. But the feedback she gave me was so, as soon as she said it, I was like, oh, right, I can see why you don't think that, or I could see why that doesn't make sense, or why there's no connection. So as you said, just in all things, I think sometimes there can be this fear of getting feedback or feeling precious, as we say, about your stuff. But getting that feedback from people outside of your, or just people outside, how folks perceive you, it can be really helpful. So I want to ask you a question here from Tara Simmons. Tara, thank you. She says, hello, how do you compartmentalize, I think, stress so that personal stresses don't spill over into your work and vice versa?
Great question. And in full transparency, I don't know if you can really compartmentalize stress. I think you can create stress strategies so that you recognize when you're stressed. And what that entails is being really in tune with your body. So, for example, for me, the minute my eye starts twitching, I know that something's awry. And I have to use strategies to kind of walk back in time. All right, so what was the last thing that I said, or was there something that someone said to me? Was there a trigger? right? Because we sometimes are dealing with things and don't even know it. And it something happens, someone said something, and it just takes us right back to that moment in time where there was issue, a trauma, a difficult conversation. It doesn't necessarily have to be all extreme in terms of the trauma. It could be, just something where you had a boss where the two of you didn't connect. So recognizing, okay, so that's what contributed to my eye twitching. All right. Is there anything I can do about that? That's in the past. So what have I truly worked through any type of forgiveness or harboring any feelings as it pertains to that particular situation? And depending on how you answer, that determines what you need to do next. Sometimes it's just as simple as walking outside and getting some fresh air and having that vitamin D, on your skin. Other times it might mean something a little bit more in terms of having someone, help you walk through whatever may be contributing or causing that stress. So many of us, we use the term work-life balance. I like the term work-life integration because that's exactly how we are. We're so integrated now with everything, technology, and we're working from home. And so the same holds true for stress. And so you have to be so in tune with your body because that's where stress will manifest itself. That's where it will come out. It's like those check engine lights in your car. When you see those lights flashing, you're like, okay, well, we need to go and get it taken care of. Our bodies are the exact same way. Our bodies are and it may come out in how you're communicating with others. If you're too curt, I'm a big proponent of going and taking a nap. Clearly,
go somewhere and lay down.
right. And we're joking, but that's true.
Yeah.
Being able to just power nap, really kind of just rejuvenates and cause you to look at things differently. The last thing I want to say in terms of Tara's question is our perception. So if you're having stress about something, ask yourself, how are you looking? How are you viewing this particular incident, this situation, this matter, this person, and why? And working with a coach or even with a counselor to kind of process through that will help. Stress doesn't necessarily just automatically go away. We have to know how to manage it effectively. So that's my advice. We just have to pay attention and then manage it accordingly.
Excellent. And Tara says, thank you. So I was just going to ask you, Tara, if that was helpful. That was such a great question. Thank you. Anyone else who has questions, please drop them in here, whether you're watching live or you're watching later. Shatanese and I will keep an eye on the chat and we'll see where the questions are later. But I love what you shared. Such great advice. And as soon as you talked about the triggers, that's something that I actually learned from my coach, Margot Geller, who whenever I say to her, she's a business coach, but I call her business therapist. But it could be something simple and I'll just say, oh, I felt kind of down, this past week. If she asked how things went, oh, I felt kind of down, or, I wasn't feeling so well. Her question is always, well, what happened? Did anything happen before that? What else was going on that week? And it got me into the habit of pausing if I did have a down moment to think, well, I wonder if sometimes maybe it was nothing. It might be hormonal or something else, but still just the idea of pausing and being like, you know what? I was watching too much news or I did have this. Exactly. Or this is us. Oh my gosh, I need therapy every time.
We binge watched it recently. I cried like 6 times.
I know. I can't binge watch it for that reason. It's so emotional. It's such a great show. Yes. But that's the thing. And I think too, a lot of times, maybe not since last year, but certainly before last year, so many of us were moving so fast. So something happens, or maybe myself. I don't want to put this on you, Tara, or anybody else, but you're moving so fast, something happens and it causes you to feel a certain way, but you weren't even really paying attention or you weren't really present enough to stopping, as you said, and reflecting, just like, okay, what else is going on in my life? What else happened? And that kind of, but do you think that takes a certain level of, maybe this goes back to what we're talking about today, emotional intelligence, a certain level of, self-awareness, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And sometimes we're lacking in that. And so because we're low in our own self-awareness, we don't know how we're actually coming off to individuals. So, to all my parents out there or guardians, we may be, short or curt with our children and not realizing that it's because of something that happened, in a project, or we're trying to get that that client and it didn't come through. And so not being aware of what's happening inside absolutely impacts your relationships and how you are being perceived. And that is so key. That's why on a personal level and professionally, you have to know how you show up. You have to know how you show up.
Yes, I think something I want to know if you feel the same way. As an entrepreneur, I think certainly professionally too, but as an entrepreneur, I feel like that has been, well, one is one of the greatest lessons in personal development. I always say, right? You'll learn what you're made of or not as an entrepreneur, but also for me, learning how to compartmentalize in a way, or say something, you speak to one client at 1 o'clock, it goes terribly wrong for whatever reason, right? You have another appointment at 2:30. So to carry that over into that next appointment is just, not advisable, right? Because that client has nothing to do with the last one. They don't know what happened. They don't need to know what happened. So just being able to it's not, but I don't want it to sound like it's not honoring your feelings. You can help me interpret what it is, but I've just noticed that about myself, how I can say, okay, which I think men tend to do very well. Okay, this is jacked up. Like this isn't working or whatever this is, but this is separate and apart from that. If it's absolutely is separate and apart from that. Let me focus on this right now, what's in front of me, and then move forward. So have you found that as going from, because you were in corporate before as well, right? To entrepreneurship, and maybe you've always done this, and then to being an emotional intelligence coach. But that is something that has, I would say, in my life overall been helpful for me. So say, for example, or something, I've had a stressful day in the business, and then I don't have kids, but I have parents who are in their 90s, which is always fun when you're like trying to help them learn how to get on Zoom for a doctor appointment or whatever. But it's just like, you gotta, they don't have anything to do with whatever else went on. Don't take it out on them.
Right. And that kind of goes back to Tara's question about compartmentalizing. So, and I love what you just said in terms of being true to yourself and honoring, where you are. Mm-hmm. I'm a big proponent of, okay, let's sit in this moment. Let's sit for a second. Why are you feeling, what you're feeling? Out of all of the emotions that are at your disposal, why is it that this emotion is what's coming up for you? And so, being aware of, okay, this is how I'm feeling, but I can't fully lean in or process through it right now because I have a 2:00. So what do I need to do to at least get myself back to center, right? So then I can revisit, because that's where we get caught up, is we don't actually process through it. And so it lays, dormant, lies dormant until some other issue crops up. And then our response is an explosion, right?
Right. So another trigger happens, and then that thing, you're right.
Right. So it's so important that even though if you're not able to fully process through it, that you find some time to go back and make sure that I like to say, like, you're squeezing out that pus. I know that's probably really disgusting, but
yeah,
you got to squeeze out the pus so that the healing, can actually, process as it should. So
I like what you said about the why this emotion too, because that makes it a very, if anyone listening or watching has any issues with emotion, not issues isn't the right word, but just maybe trouble tapping into, maybe you feel guilty for feeling sad or guilty for feeling guilty or whatever the emotion is, right? But it's just thinking about it from more of a, putting a little distance between it, I guess, of, okay, I'm feeling sad. Why is this the emotion that I'm feeling right now? Or I feel whatever the other emotions are. That's a good way. I think that's going to be helpful for me. I'm being selfish. Helpful for me in processing, as I'm a Pisces, so I'm always emotional. But it's just like, well, why is this the one that I'm feeling, right now? And then going back and processing that. And I find even putting space between whatever it is, sometimes it's actually good that I can't deal with whatever it is right then, because sometimes putting a little distance, whether that's time or physical distance between whatever it is, it gives you a second. Like, I've had moments where I'm like, that's probably not even what they meant, or that wasn't that bad, or whatever it is. And it's just, or I don't really care, whatever it is. It gives me some space to be able to even process like that too, as opposed to if I responded in the moment, it probably would have been very different.
Right. And that goes back to also, being empathetic, because sometimes if you're in a, conversation with someone and someone responds in a way that you're like, where did that come from? Sometimes it's not even about you. and being able to
Right.
acknowledge that. So, to your earlier point about, it's great that you are aware of what's happening with you, but you also need to develop the skill of what's happening with others. So being, so in tune with, that's not even about me. I'm not picking that up. I'm
Right.
not figuratively picking that up. I'm going to let them, process through whatever they need to process and not take it personally that, they responded that way for whatever reason. And we'll come back to it. Now it's not a good time.
Is
So
that something that we can do personally and professionally? Now, I have to tell everyone because we didn't talk about this yet. Shatanese has 6 children, 6 beautiful gifts. So she knows a little bit about stress. And if you're homeschooling anyone watching or listening, I know about that. And I don't even have any children. Oh, all my girlfriends are like, when is school opening, right? So just the idea of, I'm sure there are moments when either your children might be short with you, or you might be short with them, or your partner might be, everybody's on edge, understandably. So does that also help us in those situations, whether personally or certainly, as we talked about in the beginning, professionally, as it relates to our emotional intelligence?
yes, absolutely. Having high levels of EQ really, sets you apart within the workplace because not only are you able to understand, where you are in terms of your self-expression and your own self-awareness, but you can pick up on the cues of others. So let's say you're in a meeting and you're having a conversation and you start to see that folks are shutting down. Uh,
Mm.
if you're facilitating, you need to be able to, okay, so do I need to draw them back in? Or do I need to stop and say, okay, let's revisit this. I'm sure, Elaine, you've encountered individuals who have that, that kind of a dogmatic, bullish approach. We're just going to keep going. I don't care if people are rolling their eyes, people are checked out. They have the deer in the headlights look, and that's not always good. And we have to be able to read those social cues. So if you're, talking and talking and talking, and you've lost your audience, you have to be able to say, let's, maybe I need to change the subject or stop talking or invite additional feedback. And that can make or break you when you are, working in corporate or you're trying to, work with various clients. So understanding
Yeah.
yourself as well as understanding others, so key. And it takes some time. You can actually work on it. It does take some time.
Oh, perfect. I'm glad you said that, because that was going to be my next question. Is emotional intelligence something that can be learned? Because some people might think you either have it or you don't. It's like a trait of some sort, but it sounds like it's something that we can practice. And in the case of what you just mentioned, I love about being empathetic or aware if you're leading a meeting or even just having a conversation with friends. I just usually do a check-in, like, does that make sense? Does that resonate? Does that work? Just some kind of question to make people be like, oh, she's talking to me, or let them know. Yeah, exactly. She wants me to pay attention. But is it something that can be learned?
It absolutely is. So unlike IQ is set at a certain age, fairly early in our development. Emotional intelligence, you can actually improve. So as I stated earlier, we have varying scores, and that's, where our muscles, which muscles are we most comfortable with using. And by having the assessment and having the report, you can see, I might need to work on my decision-making skills just a little bit more, and being able to identify what those strategies are. So the report is excellent in that, and then working with a coach can help even expand even further. So yes, you can improve on your emotional intelligence, and so for a good example is individuals who are not very assertive or who are low on the assertiveness subscale. We can, identify times at work or even personally. It really depends. And I want to come back to that comment in just a second. But we can identify times where, all right, so the next opportunity that you have to be in a meeting, I want you to be able to speak up on this particular project on which you're working. And so we'll practice in advance. These are the 3 things that you'll need to communicate. And, let's see how that feels. Let's work on that. Let's exercise that muscle. It's just like when you're in the gym and you have a personal trainer who's right next to you, right? They're watching you. They're making sure your form is appropriate because they don't want you to hurt yourself, right? We don't want you to go in and say something that you now have a pink slip. Not
right. That's not the goal, right? Right.
So as a personal trainer, they're watching you. You're using a new muscle. Yes, absolutely. It will be a challenge. It'll be a stretch. You'll be sore afterwards. But I guarantee that if you keep doing it, you'll gradually continue to increase. So being placed in those situations where you are assertive, and we'll start small depending on where the person is and what their score is. But I want them to be able to use that muscle, continue to exercise it, especially if they're wanting to have a different trajectory for their career. And I was going to say, and the
Personally,
it just
you're going to say about personally with emotional intelligence.
yes, the thought just flipped out of my head. So
Right, I know. Well, I have a question. I'm sure it'll come back. Someone will start asking a question. You're like, oh, I remember. So I have a question while you think about that. But so virtually, since so many of us are working online or via Zoom and having meetings via Zoom and all of that, does your training or coaching people in those spaces, since a lot of folks are doing things online, is it different emotional intelligence, or are there some tips maybe for how we can read the room when I'm just speaking to a camera or to a computer or that kind of thing? Have you found that you've needed to help people sort of adjust to this new normal, so to speak?
great question. It has been somewhat of a change because we are accustomed to being face to face, but you can still read a room, especially if everyone has their cameras on. You can see it and also read the chat. So are people putting comments in the chat? Are they responding? And my coaching is done virtually, and so I've been coaching various clients and teams on emotional intelligence. I like the concept of diversity and emotional intelligence. My premise is you can't fully begin to understand someone else and perhaps the shoes in which they walk until you understand, yourself and what's going on here. So once you have a better understanding of, okay, now I understand, or now I see why. Then you're able to, be more empathetic and understand someone else from a diverse perspective. So, I've facilitated workshops in that arena as well. But yes, you have to work a little harder because we are virtual, but you can still pick up on various cues. You can still see if people are paying attention or if their eyes are glossing over, or if they're engaged or if they're tired, any of that. But again, you have to be in tune and have a watchful eye.
And if you're doing a workshop or a presentation or anything like that, do you think it would be helpful to even have things written into say you're reading something or you have a presentation, just moments even written in where it says pause and check in with people? You know what I mean? So maybe if people don't have their cameras on, or sometimes I know that happens if you're talking to people, especially in different parts of the world, it might be, 3 a.m. where they are, so they don't have their camera on. But if you have some kind of note for yourself just to pause and check in, do you think that could be helpful as well?
Yes, and all of my workshops are pretty interactive, so it's already embedded. But absolutely, that's a great tip for individuals who are facilitating. But in terms of having individuals put comments in the chat, use the raise hand feature. Just again come off mute and tell us about what you just saw, what you just heard. When have you experienced anything like that? So asking those questions to again draw people in and being mindful of those individuals who are not as vocal. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're not engaged or they just may be processing differently. So we have to be able to honor, who they are in that space as well. So yes, as a facilitator, it's a little bit more challenging, a little bit more dubious, but it can still be done. You can still be as engaging rather, and making certain that people are hearing what you have to say, that they're picking up what you're dropping.
That's right. That's right. So if you had to give us three things that you really wanted us to know or understand as of today about either about emotional intelligence or about its importance in our lives, personally and professionally, what would you say? I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but what would you say those 3 things are? And again, anyone, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and drop them in the comments, but this is something I really want to know.
Yeah. So the 3 things I would say is go and find a coach. So you can actually take the assessment and see where you are. And even if there has been some time that has elapsed, it's a great time to just see if there's anything that's changed. Or if you are wanting to position yourself in such a way, a year from now, 2 years from now, you want to be in a different position, a great opportunity to find a coach, take the assessment, and to start working through those various areas, those opportunities for growth. Number two, don't be afraid of what you find, and working with a coach will help with that, because sometimes people they have these expectations of themselves, and so when they get the reports back, they're like, oh man, I thought I was way more empathetic, or I thought I could handle stress much better than what the report is saying. And so working with the coach, we can look at each of the questions, if there are areas of concern or areas where you thought, yeah, this is not me at all. But again, working with someone who's certified, they can kind of help weed out if, you may think that this is not you, but in all actuality, this is you all day long.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Long. So,
right.
We want to be able to kind of tease that out and, work through that. And then lastly, be certain to celebrate your successes, celebrate those wins. So when you do begin this journey of, making those slight changes, to pause and say, yay, and then, keep going, keep it moving. So, take the assessment, be mindful of what the assessment reveals, and not to be too hard on yourself, and to celebrate those wins. We oftentimes, as just people in general, get so focused on just achieving that we don't pause for a moment and actually celebrate ourselves, celebrate our successes. And I did remember.
Oh, I knew it. It's like if you keep talking to mine, I'll come back around like, hey, this is what you were going to say. Yeah. Okay, tell us.
Yes. So when you take the assessment, it's advised, especially if you're trying to make some improvements at work, that you approach it with, the mindset of work. But we also show up differently. We can show up at work one way and show up personally another way, because we're having to make different decisions. So like you stated earlier, with you helping your parents, trying to get on Zoom and, other technology fun things, that may not necessarily be something that you have to do at work or for anyone else. So you're exercising different muscles in those two different roles. So working with the coach, you can talk through that. Like, yeah, that's definitely me at work, but at home, I'm not very assertive. I don't have to be. And so therefore, yeah, I don't care what we're having for dinner. Yeah.
Right.
I don't care what movie we watch.
Look, this could be a whole other conversation, because when you said about at home, I don't have to be like that. I'm thinking about relationships and how sometimes it's interpreted with, and I write about this a lot on LinkedIn, actually, about ambitious women thinking sometimes partners, especially men, think that's who you are all the time. And I'm like, I don't know about everybody else, but for me, I don't want to be that at home. I want to be taken care of, and just, when I'm out in the world and working and doing things for my business and all those different, whatever it is, yes, ambitious, go for it, going to get it, whatever that looks like. At home, though, I want to be soft. And not that you can't be ambitious and soft, but it's just a different part of you, a different part of me, seeing for myself, that I'd like to let show. And I think even being honest with myself about that, and with whoever, the person is in my life, about, well, I'm not going to be, the go-getter making the rolls and all that stuff at home, unless that's who you want to be, but it doesn't have to be who you have to be all the time.
Right. And we are different beings. We absolutely.
And with my parents, it's just patience. That's you just have to have patience with everything.
Yes. And being able to articulate that's also exercising emotional intelligence, because you are self-aware. You recognize that when I'm, outward facing, absolutely type A, whatever, the descriptor is, go. But when it's, a personal setting, I will be sitting there waiting for someone to
tell you when to blink and everything.
Right.
Exactly.
But being able to
Yeah.
articulate that and let people know what you need and how you're going to be in this situation, so that there's no confusion, there's no
Right.
conflict, conflict is minimized. Whenever you get people together, I've been in HR for 20 plus years. Whenever you get people together, there's bound to be conflict. There's going to be conflict, but you can help mitigate it by being able to articulate and talk through and communicate and pick up on those cues that this is, we might need to revisit this, or yes, let's continue to push in. Let's continue to squeeze out that press, as I said earlier.
Excellent. So now tell everyone, Shatanese, how they can get in touch with you and learn more about working with you, either as a coach or to hear more about everything else that you're up to. Where can we find you?
Absolutely. I am on essentially all platforms. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I'm even on Twitter, I'm on YouTube, and it's always the same, Shatanese Reese. So if you look up Shatanese Reese, you can find me in any of those platforms. So I welcome the connection, the questions, and happy emotional intelligence.
Yes, and tell everyone your website. I will make sure that, of course, if you're listening to this later, we have links and everything.
Yes, it's shatanesereese.com.
Keep it simple. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I tell people. Like, what do you want? Elaine Fluker. I just keep it simple.
And so the only caveat with Facebook is that Shatanese Reese LLC. But that's
still, if they search your name, they'll find you. Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I didn't want to turn it too much into my own therapy, but I'm just always intrigued about emotional intelligence, how it plays a role, and that whatever that is, it has a name now, because I've been told that in workspaces, especially corporate, about being able to read people, and at that time we didn't have that language of emotional intelligence. And as soon as I started hearing about it, I was like, oh, that's what that is, and that's how that's worked for me. So
yes, that's exactly right. And being able to be comfortable in those various spaces. So and recognizing your growth opportunities. So I've enjoyed our time this evening. It has been
Thank you. I did too. Thank you so much. Everyone, go to shatanesereese.com to find out more, to find out about coaching, find out about emotional intelligence, and just follow her on all the things so we can make sure to stay in touch. Thank you. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening, whether now or later. Thank you, Shatanese. Hold on just a second.
Thank you.
Okay.